Hey, 28 weeks later. All right. Hey, look, an About Me slide.
What?
Yeah. So, since most of y'all know me, I'm just going to skip over and just talk about the pictures. The picture on the left there is a handmade chessboard made by Alex Cummings. We are playing chess on his table saw in his wood shop. It's the only time I recommend drinking in the wood shop. I have been working on wood since the pandemic started, basically. I got bored and was like, I know how to build things. I'm going to build furniture. Don't build furniture. It's going to make you wish that you could build furniture full time and there's no money in it, or you're going to lose a thumb on a table saw. One of the two. The standing desk there is where I do all my work during the day. If you look closely at my screen there, you can see this presentation up on the screen. Because when I originally took the picture for this, the phone was slightly askew, and it was very obvious in the picture, so I had to fix it. I have been biking and running a lot since the pandemic ended and we started to come back out because I realized I'd been drinking too much, eating too much, and gotten fat. So this particular photo from my bike is when I became a Ron White joke, and one of the bolts that holds my tire together fell off while I was riding down the road at 30 miles an hour.
Awesome.
Yeah, see, if you look closely, the pin there is just like, whoop, right out of the bike. The little guy there was on the back of the bike, so thankfully I did not crash. And that picture there is my family when my wife and I finished our first 5K last month.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well done.
Congrats, man.
Thank you. I
Awesome.
honestly hated running, and I thought I would never actually do it recreationally, but I've started doing it recreationally. And after the initial 3 or 4 weeks of this is awful, this is awful, this is awful, this is awful, it's not awful anymore. And I don't know if I've just been brainwashed or it's actually kind of fun. All right, so let's get into what we're talking about tonight. I originally had an idea to do an entire presentation that was making references to 28 days later, or 28 weeks later, but the movie's really not that good, and there's not that many references you can make to zombies. There probably are. I didn't want to work that hard at it. So this is just going to be a mess of geeky references to things I think are fun. We're going to start with a clip show. So we're going to dive through the presentation I gave 30 weeks ago now. It was 28 weeks when I was putting the presentation together. But I gave a presentation on threat modeling, talking through what it is, how you do it, and I said some things that I'm not proud of, that were not correct, and I want to fix that today. So we're gonna go through the refinement that I've undergone in the intervening weeks and the new tools that I'm using. I'm going to talk about the components of a finished model. I didn't really have a good idea of what a finished model looked like when I gave this talk previously. I had an idea of where I wanted to go, but I didn't have it crystallized in my head to the same degree that I do right now. Then we're going to talk through actually building the model and steps you have to go through, and then the things that you can produce out of the threat model that actually show value. And then finally wrap up with resources, methodologies, and stuff like that. So, this is Kolosek, interrupting with questions. Here is our second reference tonight to interrupts from Magic the Gathering, because I've been a lifelong addict. You young folks in the room, please stay very far away from Magic the Gathering. It will lead you to smelly, smelly rooms and being very broke.
What was this?
Magic the Gathering.
Okay.
You'll be in rooms filled with BO, and you'll spend all of your cash on little pieces of cardboard.
Oh, wow.
Ew.
If it sounds unappealing now, just wait until after you've done it. Clip show time! So this is a still from Star Trek: The Next Generation.
Hey, that's Will.
That's Will Riker, and it strapped into a clipshow device. So
Magic the Gathering was the original exchange for Bitcoin.
Oh God, that's disgusting.
oh,
Bitcoin and BL.
It was.
Oh, that's so
Magic
good.
the Gathering online exchange, Mt. Gox. And
Yeah,
of course
I knew where you were going, and I was unhappy about it. I knew where
Sorry.
you were going, and I was
Sorry,
unhappy.
Adam.
Fun facts.
So, starting the first 3 slides are just a rehash of last time. What is the threat model? So basically, you're gathering information, putting it together, building yourself an inventory of the pieces of a system. This is going to be skewed toward application threat modeling because I'm an application security engineer professionally. So you're going to want to build a inventory of the components and the people that interact with your system. You want to diagram the system so you can see how it's put together, like visually see how things are connected. And I will say how things should be put together. It's fun to get people in the room from like the networking team. They're like, oh yeah, no, these 2 systems talk together all the time. And the developer's like, what? Oh, right, thing. I forgot about thing. The next thing you want is a work list, so a bug tracker, an issue tracker, a threat list, whatever you want to call it. You're basically just building yourself a spreadsheet of work to do later. That's going to be one of the most rich work products that come out of this whole process. And lastly is a contact list. If you talk to somebody about the system, if you talk to a subject matter expert, you need to record their name, because in a year, when you're looking at this model again and working through how much you've gotten done, how much is left to do, what new threats have come out that you didn't think about when you built the model the first time, you want to be able to call up the original people you talked to or their replacement and address the new issues that have come up. I still love this meme. It's one of my favorite memes that's ever existed. So we're creating a threat model to think about a system with folks in the room that don't normally think about threats, don't normally think about defense as part of their day job. You want to socialize the system design, make sure folks talk about it, make sure you get the network engineers to argue with the application developers, to argue with the server administrators about the way things are actually put together. Because if you talk to any of those groups in isolation, they will have ideas about the way things are connected. When they start talking, they will argue with one another, and that is a good thing, because they're going to come to, whenever it comes down to it, they're either going to go, oh, right, I forgot that, or they're going to dig their heels in, and somebody's going to pull up some configs and say, no, it's like this, see? Look at the config.
Usually that's a network guy.
As a network guy, I'm with you, but I've also seen some developers pull it out and go like, no, it doesn't do that.
No, dig it.
So, comes from both directions, and that's great. The point is to elevate folks' understanding, get closer to the truth in everyone's head, so they understand the way the system's actually put together, and that helps you understand where the weaknesses are. So you want to consider threats from multiple viewpoints. You want to think about folks who wants to attack your company because of the type of business you do, and who might want to just steal your money and run. One other thing I didn't mention the last time I talked about this is attacker costs. That is something that I think gets overlooked in a lot of security conversations, especially amongst ourselves. We talk about the fact that an attack is possible, but don't really take it in context of how much is it going to take for an attacker to execute that attack, right? Yeah, there might be some SQL injection on some obscure back end, but if I have to go through 47 layers to get to that point, do I care? No, not really. I want to be spending all my time getting two-factor authentication on all of my applications so that you can't just phish my employees and gain access to my apps. And the last point on this slide is writing things down. Write things down. If you didn't write it down, it doesn't exist. If it's in your head, doesn't exist, because if you quit, if you decide to go on vacation, all of that information, boop, out of existence, gone forever.
We call it getting hit by a bus.
Yep, the bus test is an old, kind of gruesome name for it, but yeah, I prefer to think of it as, no, he's on a beach in Tahiti and he's never coming back.
Yeah, he met some girl named Tahiti.
It's a magical
I
place.
like the way y'all think about it than what my team.
It's slightly less violent than getting hit by a bus.
Ideas gone.
I will adopt that.
I have alluded to this a bit already in the 2 slides as I've talked through this, but get everybody in the room. Everybody that will show up. You don't wait if folks aren't going to come. Just start without them. But anybody you can get into the room to start talking about this is going to be helpful in the finished product, because they're going to talk through pieces of the system that they understand, and they're going to hear perspectives from folks that they don't interact with normally. And that is going to be a net win for the end system. And you need to have somebody who is the scribe for each session. That's something I don't have on this slide that's occurring to me as I present now. But it needs to be somebody's job to take notes, write this down, and then convert that into a narrative that can be easily consumed later on.
Adam, I'll also add that I actually like the approach of having multiple people take notes. So I just did this last week with one of my guys. I was like, hey, I made sure that he was taking notes, but then we kind of combined our notes at the end to make sure that, because he captured some different stuff that I didn't, right? And I captured stuff that he didn't. So
that's a matter of perspective, right? You had things that were important, and he thought other things were important. So.
But yeah, and to Adam's point too, I always like sending these out in meeting notes. Of course, no one's going to necessarily read them, but at least you have it out there of, hey, a lot of times too, I will find with threat modeling sessions is that there are several action items that need to occur. And this could be something like a developer having to go look up something. And so to ensure that stuff gets done, it's calling out specifically who said they would go do it and like when, and then having that in the meeting notes, and then also, allow people to review and correct anything. And I have had like email conversations where people actually did review it and corrected some of the notes. And that's an artifact in itself too, is that email chain. That is like what we talked about, what we discovered, action items for stuff, so that you can refer back to that when you need to.
Yeah, email is the official bus driver.
Mm-hmm. It can be.
Yeah.
It can be. But I mean, it also is a really good accountability tool. Like, you puts things that people said in black and white. Yep.
Yeah, you said this 3 weeks ago. Now where is it?
So this particular image may be the best thing that came out of 28 Weeks Later. And I'm a big fan of that whole zombie series, but yeah, I can't recommend it as a good movie. However, I love this poster.
Those your eyes.
Yeah, no, the heterochromia is a thing. So when you're building a threat model, you want to identify assets to be protected. You want to identify potential threats. You also want to identify vulnerable configurations in process. Threat modeling has been, I sort of came into it expecting threat modeling to be a accompaniment to pen testing, and it kind of is, but I'm not so much finding, hey,
What's going on?
come on, grab some refreshments. We're just getting into the good stuff.
Okay. You sit over here out of the way.
You might want to just, you're on camera.
Hey, I'm Anthony.
Excellent. I like that response. So I sort of expected this to be like, hey, pen testers, go over here and see if you can find injection here in this part of the application. And I might get to that point, but it's been far more beneficial to go, wait, your configuration is this. You've got all these protections on the front end that the user interacts with, but the API on the back end is just sitting on the internet. Or your business process allows this. Well, what if somebody does that? Well, then they would just be allowed to do that. Okay, so I can just send myself pills? Cool. I hope nobody tries to do that in the next 2 days. So it's really been helpful for identifying flaws in business process, flaws in the configuration of systems, that just things that got overlooked in the deployment of security controls. So your objective is to analyze impact of risks that you identified. I think that there's some word salad going on in that slide, and I'm not 100% sure what happened, so sorry about that. But once you've captured threats and risks and sort of analyzed them, quantified how much risk each one carries, you're going to want to develop mitigation strategies for the higher risk stuff that actually might get you popped, and that's sort of a judgment call. That's something that I feel like you will refine over time and is going to feel uncomfortable the first few times you do it, but you got to learn somehow. It's a very powerful tool for informing your testing, so picking out things that you want your pen testers to spend more time on. I know I said that hadn't been as valuable. It does do that, but it also does the other thing much better than I had ever anticipated. And finally, you get down to documenting your accepted risks. And I specifically call out accepted here because there's going to be a lot of risks that you identify that your business is just going to go, I know. And that
Hey, we do that.
you as a security practitioner can't really do anything about that. Like, if you go to your boss and say the building might burn down, and he goes, I don't care, and lights a match. Okay, boss. Gonna go on lunch now.
Okay, we've got some networks on VLAN 1.
Yeah. These things happen. And we still get paid. So tooling. Still going to be on the train for whiteboards if you're in a room. Visio. Draw.io is a new thing that I was unfamiliar with when I gave this talk last time. I am a big proponent of this application. It is a free tool. It is cross-platform. They have a cloud deployment of it that is totally free to use, or you can download the executable and run it on your workstation, save files. The really nice thing I like about the files that Draw.io produces is that if you put them in a repository like GitHub or Bitbucket, the files themselves are text-based on the back end and really relatively small, and the changes to them don't look like a blob getting updated. You can actually like see things getting modified in GitHub, so that's kind of neat. OS Threat Dragon's out there, Microsoft threat modeling tool. I talked about that a lot in the last meeting, or the last time I gave this presentation. I am less on the train for that tool now than I was. It does have some really nice features, and of the pair of the OWASP Threat Dragon versus the threat modeling tool, I think it is much more mature. I've also found myself fiddling with all of the things you can change in the Microsoft threat modeling tool, and I was just getting lost in the minutia, and I wanted to be able to move forward with other aspects of threat modeling and not just fiddle with whether or not this connection was SSL or SSH or just a regular old HTTP connection. Finally, something to track bugs with. Excel is always a good option. If you've got a big corporate work tracking system, fine, go use that. I'm not gonna, I'll feel sorry for you a tiny bit, but I mean, we all have to use ServiceNow at some point. I am using today a combination of Draw.io to build data flow diagrams and attack trees. There is a process flow diagram that I will talk about a little bit later in the presentation. I spent a lot of time talking about how valuable process flow documentation is in the last talk, and I think that was a mistake. I wish I hadn't done that. It is incredibly useful, but it is also incredibly time consuming and tedious, and oof. Confluence is basically a competitor with SharePoint. Gives you sort of a combination file share wiki thing. my company uses Confluence, so it's the wiki of choice. But you basically just need some way to track a body of text that describes your application. I originally wanted to use a Bitbucket GitHub repo to sort of build README files to track all this, just because I really desperately want to be a programmer in my heart of hearts, and I've never quite made it that far in my career. But the audience that I wanted to consume this data was going to be able to do it better in Confluence, so that's the tool I use. And yeah, I'm not going to spend any more time talking about issue tracking. Use Excel. Models. I really need to buy one of these.
Me too.
If I buy one, that's probably going to be my first one. The old Constitution refit.
Jordy LaForge has a fantastic new model enterprise. You're watching said show.
Yeah, I've seen that episode, and boy, oh, that's the best time I've had watching any of the new Trek. All right. So, a complete-ish model, or threat model, end to end, right? So, what are we talking about to have a working threat model? Your mileage may vary, but I feel like you need to have three things: a narrative, visual aids, and then a work list that you are going to follow up on, stuff that you're going to follow up on, questions that you need answered, threats you've identified that you need to figure out a way to mitigate, and a way to track which threats you've thought about but are mitigated by existing controls. And I know you're thinking, well, those are mitigated, why do I care? You care because a year from now when you go through the model again, you want to think about, have those mitigations changed? Did somebody take the firewall that we had that was doing this job and replace it with a product that doesn't do that anymore?
I like that.
So in your narrative, you want to set your scope. That's really important. So if there's a third party that you interact with that you're just not going to include as part of your threat model, you call that out. And that's another thing that when you review the model in a year, you want to make sure that you level set on that, make sure that's still the case. Track, again, application guy, so track the URLs involved, the repos, where's the code live, I think that deployment, you may include deployment as part of the scope. I think that's actually a sort of side thing. Talking through the deployment process for your applications, like what does it take to go from a line of code on a developer's workstation through all the testing and QA and security assessments to get on a server serving customers. Like that's an assessment in and of itself that is separate and distinct from the security of a system that you're talking about. So anyway, talk about a component list. So you're going to want to get as fine-grained as it makes sense to. If you've got an application that consists of front end, a back end API, and then a bunch of worker nodes and a couple of SQL databases, like capture all of that. All of those pieces are important. And if you lay all of those pieces out in a visual diagram and then you start drawing connections between them and one of them doesn't have a connection, it's a big red flag that, hey, there's functionality in your application that you're not catching. And two, if you're going through a process diagram and they start talking about a component that isn't in your inventory, like, what do you mean there's a widget? We didn't talk about a widget. There was no widget there. And then capture who's contributed. That goes in the narrative. That gets back to fingerprinting on the work product, so you know who to talk to when you're reviewing things, or if you find an issue. Some of the folks that have been surprising to me that are interested in this is the incident response folks. They really like being able to go to a wiki page and see all of the subject matter experts for a given application. If they have an incident that pops up related to one of those applications, they're like, maybe I'll go talk to this guy. Maybe he knows what's going on.
Hell yeah.
That alone is worth any amount of argument that would happen in the room to get any of the other information.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, connecting bodies in the ground to people walking around that know about them is kind of huge.
I do that all the time. If I find something that I don't know how it's working and nobody's available, since again half my team is in Europe, so their work day is done at 5, which is 12 o'clock our time.
Right.
So come 2 o'clock, somebody's banging on my door. They're not banging on my door. They hit me, on the team stuff, and I'm like, yo, all right. So I'm going to Snow or ServiceNow or we use SharePoint versus Confluence, and I'm looking at, all right, who was the last contributor to this thing here, because you're
That's
not
right.
gonna contribute unless you know something, right? How you gonna add something and you don't know what you adding to? But if your name is on it.
On all of my Confluence pages, I set it up so that if anyone ever touched the Confluence page, there's a version history at the bottom, and it shows that they touched it, right? And then I encountered the thing where folks would attend the meeting and have me enter all the stuff in Confluence. Like, okay, sure. So I just start recording all of the meeting attendees in every, like, you're not getting out. I know you attended. I know you provided information. You're listed. You're part of the black book now. All right, so visual models. So data flow diagrams are hugely important, and they literally just talk, like you lay out all your components in some sort of visual order, draw out your boundaries of trust, and so basically you've got a firewall there, you've got some sort of security control there between a certain set of systems, so like between your corporate network and the internet, for instance. Let me silence this so it stops annoying us. Sorry about that. Lay out all your trust boundaries, lay out all your components, and then show how those components are connected. Show where different, you want to, as part of the data flow diagram, you want to list actors. So that's human beings interacting with the system. You want to show where they're coming into the system, what things they're talking to, and then just follow through from there until you've connected all of the pieces and parts. Process flow, sort of related to that. You basically delete all of the other connections and then sequence the connections one by one through a given process. So like the new user registration process, you're going to walk through what are all the steps that happen. This user talks to this system, talks to that system, talks to that system. An email is sent to the new user, then they come in and set a password. Anyway, you can see as I'm talking through this how that could get tedious. It can be dozens, hundreds of different connections for a given process, and it really doesn't make sense on your really complex business processes, especially if the business flow, if you built a business flow chart and it's got multiple branches and there's like A, B, and C 7 or 8 times, you're going to go mad trying to build that process flow diagram all over again just for that process. It's easier to generalize and only dive in where you think there might be an issue. And attack trees. That is something that is net new to this presentation. I did not talk about those at all, and I have really kind of fallen in love with them. The idea behind an attack tree is that you start with an attacker objective, right? So an attacker wants to steal your data. What are the things they're going to do first to try and do that, right? They're going to try to gain access to your system either through some exploit on your servers or through phishing one of your users to gain legitimate access through or compromised access through credentials. So anyway, you repeat that process. Okay, well, what then? Well, what then? Well, what then? Until they've gotten what they want. That tree gives you a chain, right? They've got to go through these successive steps to successfully compromise the system. Then you can estimate cost based on those, based on your knowledge of the industry, what sort of skills you would need to do all that. And then that tells you whether or not it's going to be worth it to the attacker. If it's going to cost them $500,000 to get $10,000, well, why the hell would they do that? Yes, Corey.
Do you use any certain type of tool for tracking that, or is that the name of the tool?
The attack tree?
Yeah.
So there are a lot of different platforms out there for building standalone attack trees. I looked at using a bunch of them and then fell back to using Draw.io and building them as a visual thing. And then I just take the leaves off of the bottom of the attack tree and convert that into work items. So that's.
You got an example of an attack
I
tree?
absolutely do. We're going to get into that.
You the man.
All right. So, starting with narratives, topics to cover. Go through, enumerate the components, as I've said. You want to talk through authentication. So, how do you authenticate users? Where do their identities live? Are you using federation with some other identity source? Talk about logging and alerting. What do your incident responders need to be aware of? What is this application going to generate? Where is it going to send those logs? Is it actually hooked in? If some attacker compromised the system, would it ever bother to let your SOC know? Talk about the users. Who are the users that are supposed to be there? How do you give them permissions? How many different types of users are there? In some applications, the answer may fucking terrify you. It may be awful. I have looked at some where they literally just like turn bits on for certain users and they get God knows what access in the system. It was designed 15 years ago, and they've just been iteratively adding to it ever since. And God, access control was not a thing they thought about. Features and enumeration. Feature enumeration. You want to go through. So, I have found that it's most useful in modeling applications to talk about it from the perspective of a user. What features do I have access to? What things are made available to me by this application, right? What can I do with it? I don't care so much about the nuts and bolts on the back end in this. I'm literally just talking about I can register a new user, I can file a claim, I can upload evidence, I can get back the results of a claim. Like those sorts of things are the things I want to enumerate as features. Then for each one, I want to talk about what data we're capturing in that feature. Where do we send that data? Do we store that data? What data do we store? And what data do we produce and hand back to the user, right? So we want to capture all of that because all that factors into how risky or how much risk is built into that feature. And like if it's a thing where I'm just accepting files, that's a certain kind of risk. If it's a thing where I'm accepting data from end users and then handing them back their medical data, that's a different kind of risk. And if I can manipulate that to start handing me other users' medical data, I'm suddenly more terrified than I am of somebody just uploading dangerous files because I can mitigate that on the back end. And that's a risk to me versus, oops, now I've compromised all of my members' user data. Or health data, rather. Sorry. So, talking about building models, the visual models, Michael Hendrickson has a fantastic Draw.io template out there. I have started using it for all of my stuff that I build. The link is right there. It's actually included in I've got a GitHub repository that I built to capture all of my threat modeling thoughts. Basically this whole presentation's up there, and a whole lot of playbook type data on like what kind of questions you need to ask, how do you collect all this data, and then what you should produce out of it is all captured there. This link is captured there as well. Big thanks to this guy for putting that out there and making my life much easier. This is the new data flow diagram based on his, and this is actually the example he provides on his GitHub page. So there's a lot going on visually, and I'm going to walk through the pieces and parts here, but just to talk you through what we're capturing. At the bottom, you've got a list of assets, and you can see those tagged on different pieces around the system. So glancing at this, you can see which things are connected where, and you can also see which pieces of information are present in each of those information processors and data stores, right? So the processors are the circles, the data stores are the two vertical lines over and under, and then the actors are the boxes over on the left-hand side. In this example, he's a little bit loosey-goosey about the credit score partner is probably not a human interactor. I think that's probably going to be a machine. I would probably build that as a circle in my diagrams. But anyway, you also see you've got the trust boundaries here. So again, those are going to represent firewall security controls that would prevent communication between those different layers within the application or what have you. The other,
Hey, Adam, how long do you think it takes to make this?
so that depends on how much detail you want to go into. I think you could put this together in 2-3 hours to get a good diagram, and that's going from a text narrative, a combination of a text narrative and a little bit of sketching, up through capturing this in a visual diagram. So
are you doing this? Are you doing this after you meet with the whoever it is that you're?
So I wouldn't try to capture all of the tagging on everything. So the A2, the C2, the T4. I wouldn't try to capture all of that while you've got everybody in the room. I would make notes about that and then build that narrative out after the fact. And it actually kind of helps me as I'm going through this process to review what's been explained. And then as I lay out the visual diagram, I can make sure that the notes I took make sense, and then send the visual diagram over to the developers and say, hey, is this actually the way things work? And explain, like, we go through from here to here to here, and they're like, yes or no, that's not quite right. So it's an opportunity for me to review the data and make sure it's accurate, and then for me to tell them what I think I heard, and then for them to give me a thumbs up or thumbs down. So the other thing it's tagged on here, does that answer your question? Sorry.
No, that does. Yeah, thank you.
So the other thing it's tagged on here is the threat actors. So, and the red boxes, and you can kind of play around and experiment with this. But I've found this to be really, really helpful in building attack trees later on, is to think about, but basically any user in your system is potentially evil, right? Because their credentials could be compromised, or they could just be a internal threat actor, or insider threat rather. The other thing is that it forces you to think about, it forces you to start diagramming like who the external threats you think you need to be worried about are early on in the process, before you get to thinking about like what their motives are.
Question about that part.
Yeah.
When you say thinking about the external threat actors, are you speaking to like named groups or, like nation states, or just in more general kind of terms?
I think it's easier to think about categories, right? So, are you concerned about hacktivists, or is your primary concern credit card scammers, or are you worried about ransomware groups? Ransomware groups is probably pretty ubiquitous. Hacktivists is significantly less so, right? Like a small a small government agency in South Carolina has less to worry about from a hacktivist group than a high-profile national agency or a big corporation might have to worry about, right? So thinking about what the threats to your industry vertical are, and then sort of find a way to capture that. I will admit that that's been kind of an uphill battle in my experience. Just getting people to sit down and like think about who those folks might be is kind of a challenge.
Yeah, I don't think anybody
Yeah.
breaking the Sumter City Hall.
Yeah, where my brain went was, I'm in the financial sector, so there's obviously threat groups that target financial sector specifically. There's ones for healthcare and that sort of thing. So I didn't know if you meant specifically within your sector those threat actors, or if you meant like you explained, more general in categories. So.
And maybe it's probably going to be a combination, right? If you've got folks that are working a SOC that are spending a lot of time on the dark web looking at threat actors, they may have active intelligence that you need to be concerned about a group. But short of that, I think categorical is the easy place to start, that at least gets you thinking about, well, what is a ransomware group gonna, like, what is their primary objective, and like what's their path to victory in your environment? So, any other questions? Cool, clicking. All right, so you asked for an attack tree. Here's an attack tree. This is sort of the classical example of what an attack tree might look like. It basically has an objective at the top, and it's an OR symbol because you can use any of the items below that to achieve that objective. And you just repeat down the tree, right? So if I want to open the safe, I might pick the lock, I might cut the safe open, I might learn the combination. That's probably the easiest one. So how do I do that? I can either find it written down somewhere, or I can get it from a target, go down that tree, get it from a target, then I can threaten them with a wrench, I could bribe them, I could blackmail them, or I could just listen, and maybe they'll tell me the combination if I listen to their conversations long enough.
I'm surprised you don't have dynamite on there, but go ahead.
See, that's the point of this whole exercise is we've reviewed the attack tree, and I missed dynamite in this example.
You're playing a different game of Clue than
I would counter the dynamite by saying that it might lessen the value of whatever's inside the safe, but be that as it may. So the nitty gritty here is think about your attacker. What do they want? Enumerate their methods to get what they want, and then think about the mitigations and controls you have. Because anywhere on these this tree, you can put a little shield at the bottom and say, well, they can't pick the lock because we paid for a super duper unpickable safe or whatever. You can stop worrying about that threat. You've mitigated it, right? Your mitigation may not be as good as you think it is, but for the purposes of this exercise, in starting out, it's good for now. You want to get to testing these assumptions later, but for the time being, get your assumptions down on paper because that gives you something to test later on.
I like this because it kind of removes, in my mind, it removes the concern in the back of my mind is I'm not an attacker, I don't know how they think, and this kind of takes it a real world scenario, if you will. Like, how would you get into a safe? Like, if you get the right people in the room, you can figure out like what are all the ways to open the safe. From
Precisely.
a developer's point of view, from a business person, from like a feature
lay
point
this
of view.
out lay this out and say, if I were going to attack the system, this is the way I would do it. Me, singular. But when you put it in front of a group of people, then it becomes, how would we attack this? And that gets you a much more diverse set of attack vectors. And yeah, you're absolutely right. That is going to net you a much more robust defense in the end, because you're going to follow each of those threads down to the end and figure out what the right mitigation is. And the right mitigation may be, like.
So wait, so how does this fit into Stride? Because I like using Stride for that. We will walk through Stride if people are having a struggle to think it through stuff like how to attack trees and something like and Stride. Adam, do you want to explain Stride, or do you want me to? So Stride is spoofing, right? So it's an attack. How do you spoof something? T for Stride is tampering. R is repudiation, which I don't fully understand, but like I is information disclosure. D is I lost it. I had it. Denial, and then E is like elevation. Right? Those are like 5 sets of attacks that you can do, and you get people to think about like how do you use these attacks against the application.
Same process.
It's kind of the same. To me, Stride is extremely helpful for validating that you've thought about all of the different angles of attack, and for getting you unstuck. If you're building an attack tree and you're like, I don't know what comes next, the Stride is probably going to give you the answer. But again, the attack tree is a separate tool to kind of get you thinking like an attacker and like what the attacker wants. Another step that I haven't had to go to, because honestly, you can kind of feel this out as you're building the attack tree. is assigning estimate cost for the attacker to each of these legs. Like cutting open the safe is going to have some costs associated with it, right? Like you've got to have access to the safe, you've got to have the tools to cut it open, and you got to have the time to do it. All of those, the combination of those costs make it really difficult, right? Because you basically have to steal the damn safe in order to have the time to do all that.
Right.
Without
or find out when they're not there, or it's open.
Right, like you got to have a attack window, and then figure out how to defeat all the other physical controls. But so you can kind of feel that out on like which things do I need to be really worried about, and which things do I need to not worry about so much.
Mission Impossible.
Yeah, right. Like which of these is going to require a face that I can just peel off of mine to become a different person.
Finger you can cut off so you can use the scanner.
That's a good point though. Is like, can I just attack a person while the safe is open?
Exactly.
Way easier just to hit old Betty over the back of the head while she's got the safe open.
Or man-in-the-middle attack, same kind of.
All right, so building a threat model. Hey, look, subtitle. That didn't get deleted. Fantastic.
How do you build a subtitle?
All right, so starting with a good model. So I have a tiny screenshot of a model for a hypothetical application that I built here. We're going to talk about that model in a little more detail in just a second. So we've got some sales employees, we've got some customers acting in this system. There's an inventory app. I'm saying that's out of scope for the purposes of this model. Scope is important. This app has a couple of different front ends, right? So it's got an employee front end and a customer front end. It's got a couple of different APIs. It's got a sales API and authentication API. It's got a messaging queue that is used to allow components to communicate with one another. And then it's got a few worker jobs that do some things, some isolated processes that the API can't be bothered with. And then it's got a couple of databases on the back end. It's going to interact with a payment API and a mail provider API. And those are third parties that we don't own.
Is that a Microsoft messaging queue? Because if so, there was a 0-day or at least a critical vulnerability.
I specifically call out RabbitMQ, but
okay.
So no, but sure, could be. So data flow in Draw.io. All right, this diagram is super busy. Everyone I have shown one of these diagrams to has gone, huh? There's so much happening here. So basically, I don't quite break the assets down the way it was perhaps intended, but this is the way I found most useful. So I kind of have it broken down based on either a component chunk that I can flow through the system or a business process, right? So like password resets, that's a business process that the application is capable of performing, and I want to be able to track the data from that process all the way through the system. That might be a different piece of information as it mutates through the system, as you follow through the process, but I want to be able to follow that process like a bouncing ball all the way through from the person who initiated it to the finale. So one other thing that Draw.io has, the key. I think I've already talked through all the component pieces. There's a key in the lower right there. So we've got the actor, there's the square bits, those human beings again. Processor, that's a machine doing work. A application probably might just be like a script that's running as a worker agent. Those workers, that might be a full-blown application somebody compiled and then has executed and is running on a scheduled task or is sitting there waiting for a push notification or whatever. Or it might just be a PowerShell script. Like, it doesn't have to be complicated. At the end of the day, it's a piece of software manipulating data and interacting with systems. Then you've got data stores, and data store can be a file system, it can be a database, it can be an FTP server, it's anywhere data comes to rest for any period of time. And it's not being actively worked on in memory. So trust boundaries, again, that's anything that's like going through a firewall, going through a security control. If there are permissions that prevent you from accessing this across that line, that can be a trust boundary. It just Your mileage may vary, but it's a helpful construct to just lay those out and know that if you cross that line, you got to jump through certain hoops. Then I've got the assets and threats tagged on here. Those are in the little tags, and they correspond to the listed threats in the top right. The template from Michael comes with a similar table to track your protections and your mitigations. I have found that thus far to be kind of tedious to use, but that is another option out there if you get that far in the process to go in and start tagging mitigations and protections in your threat model. So one thing that Draw.io does really well, or one feature that I have found a lot of mileage out of, is the ability to tag objects. So you can select any of these things and tag it, and you can enumerate as many tags as you want in a diagram. What I've done is gone through and tagged the actors, processors, and data stores as a category, and I have tagged each of these business processes with all of the places they touch in the system. What that allows me to do is this. So if I want to talk about identity and password resets, I can filter to look at just those tags, and the rest of the diagram vanishes, and now I'm looking at only the data stores and the data processors that are involved in that process flow. I can do the same thing for sales and payments, refunds.
That's dope.
And then do the same thing for marketing data, right? So as I'm thinking through this, I can all right, clear the board. Let's just focus on the process at hand and what might go wrong here. Because what you're going to find as you threat model is that there are some business processes, some features available in the app that you just don't care about that much, because they don't present the attacker with any value that they wouldn't have through some other feature. And if you can mitigate the problems you find there, who cares? You solve the problem. So coming back to the full diagram, now we're gonna skip in. So let's talk about attack trees. So this is the attack tree that I built based on that model. And I was looking purely, if you look back, I've got a couple of threats enumerated here on this diagram. I'm going to focus on an evil employee, because an evil employee, if you look at the first place they hit, they have access to some identities. They've got access to sales orders, payments, refunds, and marketing messages, right? So that's almost the entire application. So if I focus on that guy being evil and what I can do there, that gets me a lot. The other thing I wanted to focus on was the potential for marketing manipulation and an evil email processor. Why did I pick that? I don't know. I was in a mood. So, this is the attack tree that I built. I'm kind of in a hurry because I didn't want to spend a ton of time on an example. But this is where I arrived, right? So, the first objective is transfer money out. So how do I transfer money out? I want to intercept a refund, right? So I want to refund myself a payment that I didn't make. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to update some customer financial info to my bank account. And then I'm going to initiate that. Look, they spent $500,000. Refund that to my bank account, please.
You've been watching Jim Browning.
I have not, but like, it seems like an easy way for a payday. I'd want a little more than $500,000 for the risk of jail time, but you know. It's important to have a price and to know what it is.
You're one of many out of Twitties in Columbia. What can you?
It was the other guy, wasn't it?
He's an exec. Come on.
So I have at the bottom of the diagram there a couple of mitigations there. So how do we prevent that attack chain from happening? Well, we can block payments on accounts where the payment info has been updated recently, right? So I can't issue a refund to somebody that's just told me that they've switched banks. Sorry, you're gonna have to wait a week. I can also require a process where if I update a customer's bank information in our system, I have to actually verbally interact with that customer. Are you?
I was visually assessing your diagram.
Oh, is there a problem?
I'm just making observations, but it is pretty impossible to read unless you're sitting where I am.
Oh, yeah. That I was afraid that might be a concern. Is that any better?
No.
It's maybe
I can make out some letters.
We'll have to have what do you call it, Kumbaya?
Yeah.
I don't know if this thing really comes out very
Oh, that's terrifying.
It's fine.
That's my
It's not ours. It's fine.
So that was the column on the left-hand side, right? The next objective is to go in and steal customers' financial data. So can I go in and steal their banking info somehow? So if I've got one other thing I sort of made an assumption on is that the employee account has already been compromised. That entire set of threats can sort of be mitigated if you just get two-factor authentication enabled. That's the other thing I really like about this about building these attack trees is you can make an assumption at the top end and then like build a huge volume of what ifs and go, we can worry about all this or deploy two-factor tokens. Pick. It's a very powerful motivator to mitigate a ton of threats. Anyhow, so the next tree that I've got built there is stealing customer financial data, using a script to go through and do it, right? So can I, as an employee, can I script something that goes through and just scrapes the shit out of the system? Can I exploit the employee application, right, to gain code exec, and then pivot to using the service account that it's running under to interact with either the app server or directly with the database. Those things should be prevented by existing controls. I don't have that webbed out as much as you might want to on a real diagram. Again, this is an example. The other option is just, can I compromise the app server straight out? Like, can I kick it over and make it do what I wanted to do instead of what it was intended to do? One avenue for that might be a supply chain attack, right? Can I upload some code to your code base without you knowing about it?
That never happens.
Yeah, never. We've never talked about that at Colasec. So the next attack tree that I have here is kind of the dystopian future that we were all promised and never got. But can we steal our customers? Can I literally just redirect all the customers away by sending out a marketing campaign saying, oops, we're going out of business, or oops, we got hacked. Please use our competitor instead.
Is this guy black? Because he's still your customers.
I mean, I'm the one that wrote it, so be mad at me.
I don't know, man. You still your customers. I mean, I'm just asking.
Be mad at me. I'm the one that wrote it. Still your customers, man.
Hide your data.
And then the last thing, and I spent way too much time on denial of service because I have discovered in looking at applications that no developer thinks about denial of service in the construction of their app, and there are endless opportunities to go through. And can I feed it 10,000 cats, and will it process all 10,000? Yes, it will go through and skin and then process all of them into nuggets.
Oh, wow.
And spend days doing that.
What if there was someone that wasn't incredibly greedy? Say this is financials, right?
Sure. Yeah.
All right. So say this is a big bank. I don't want to steal all the money. I just want to steal enough.
Yeah.
All right?
But we're all thinking that.
All I'm gonna steal is a penny.
You just want to steal
Oh,
one.
that's a Superman hack.
Hello. From every customer.
Yeah.
Every month. 1 million pennies is always $10,000.
Have you been watching Office Space?
No.
Brewster's
masterminds.
Oh, okay.
Oh.
Somebody actually did it. And he got caught because one lady was very diligent about checking her.
Where's my pennies?
Where's this penny going?
Mm.
And the bank, I mean, think about it. You open up your bank statement and it's a penny. You see all these fees, $1, $2, $5, a penny.
So, I will say this. You have pointed out, this is an excellent illustration of why this process is important and valuable. I built this model because I work for a healthcare company, and I have healthcare concerns in my brain rattling around.
Right.
You working for a financial institution have a completely different set of concerns.
I work for a drone company. I was just looking at stealing.
Okay, sure. You thinking about working for a financial institution. Yeah, but that's one of the things why I spent, and maybe I should have done this in a reverse order, but it's important to think about who your threats are,
right,
and like what the adversary's goals are, and that, like, a pen tester is never going to think about stealing a penny at a time. That's not what their motivation, and they're like,
they're trying to crash the system.
They're wanting to break into the system.
Yeah.
They're like gain control of the system. That they're not focused on a business process error that would, like, someone could exploit the fudge factor in your financial to transfer themselves half a penny.
Right.
Like, yeah, but that's absolutely a thing that this process is meant to uncover, is the whatabouts that I didn't think about when I built this diagram. So going back to denial of service, I spend way too much time thinking about denial of service, and I have only dealt with one denial of service attack in my entire career, so I don't understand why it spends so much time in my brain. But I intentionally made the tree for denial of service very small in this example, and I encourage you to do the same. Because ultimately denial of service is going to come down to what's the likelihood of it happening. It's low. And what's the cost of mitigating it? It's kind of high in the grand scheme of things you can mitigate. Paying for denial of service protection every month isn't super cheap. Anybody with a business degree is going to go, no.
Not worth it.
It's not worth it. We're going to accept the risk. And you're going to go, mm-hmm. We're going to accept the risk. And then, I thought about an attack where you go through and do a mass password reset on all of the users in the system through a script. And that gives you a really bad day, but if you require two-factor authentication, you don't have to think about it. So, two-factor. This is actually a two-factor authentication presentation. Surprise. Demo time. I just stopped sharing.
Now we just have Corey's picture.
Smile, Corey. You're on candid camera. Let me share again.
Just kidding. No, you're not.
While you do that, I'll sing and dance for a moment. I'd love to I'd love to bring up in the middle of an incident one day when, one of those accepted risks happens to be exploited, and just be like, hey, executives, remember that risk that you said wasn't a big deal and you just accepted it and said it was fine? Here it is. We accept it, right? We're here now.
To me, that is just more like, that is part of this process, and the reason I want to be so diligent in the execution of threat modeling is to get to the point where, like, I force someone to say, I accept the risk, and then I can write that down and then pull that email out and go, well, on this date, you said you didn't care, so don't be mad at me right now. Like, I get we got to deal with the problem, but shoot, it's not my fault. This is all just CYA. It's not all CYA. It's also uncovering actual things that need to be worked. So here's the tagging that I was talking about, and just to demo that piece of it. As you can see, as I'm turning that on and off, that's coming and going. Is that impossible to see? Do I need to find a way? Hang on, can I F11? I don't know. Do you have a full screen? Come on, full screen. Be nice to me. Full screen.
This is about as good as
No, I was talking to Draw.io, and that's kind of as good as it gets.
Yeah, unless you can zoom in like into a certain segment.
Yeah, I can zoom into a segment. So we'll spend all our time here, because that's where all the magic happens anyway.
Maybe I need to change resolution or something. Let's try 1080 real quick. That doesn't make a lick of difference.
That's pretty clear to me.
I was doing this earlier with the magnifier in Windows, but
Yeah, but
then I'm cutting off a lot of what you're trying to show. So
yeah, so. But anyway, I'll just demonstrate this. So the threat modeling bits and bobs are over here, and you can just drag and drop a new one on. So if we came up with a new asset that we hadn't considered previously, you can just come in here in sorry, you have to click on the right thing. So if you're in the text, you can add a new record, right? You can do A08 widget. And now I can come over here in A08 and widget. And so, I mean, it's pretty straightforward from a modifying and editing standpoint. Adding a tag is pretty easy too. A-08 underscore widget. And then, yeah, and it's automatically checked. So then to add that to RabbitMQ, I just come over here and click.
And the tagging is what allowed you to hide or show processes earlier.
Yeah, and that's, so if I turn on marketing again, see, oops, I added widget right over the top. Oh, undo that. Grab A08 and move it off the top. There we go. So now I can show and hide that, show and hide marketing. Or I can just look at the sales, payment, and refunds, right? And that's the diagram as we see it here.
Okay, so you could use tags for like business processes, and then that's where you could kind of use that in a business setting or in a production setting.
Right.
old school Photoshop layers.
Yeah, that's exactly, like, I was looking for a way to do layers in the Microsoft threat modeling tool, and that's what led me to Draw.io, and then I found his template and tagging, and I was like, this is everything I've ever wanted. And I originally intended to use that in the attack trees, tagging it with, because in the attack trees I've found that there are multiple attackers that have overlapping objectives.
Okay.
And being able to, like, okay, ignore this guy as a threat, like, what does that take away? That was originally where I wanted to go in the attack tree.
Or like, we've accepted this risk.
I don't want to. Yeah, I don't want to look at it anymore.
Left.
Yeah. So flipping over to the attack tree, I don't have the attack tree tagged in this diagram. It's just this diagram is simple enough. I think, and this is something to play around with and experiment with. In some diagrams, I've found that it's easier to double up the attacker that I'm considering for a given attack vector. And sometimes it's easier to have all of them listed on every sheet and show the overlap. It just sort of depends on the application and what your things are. But to your point about Johnny cashing it, can we steal a penny at a time? What?
Millions had Richard Pryor taking half.
He showed up. Yeah, he showed up in the Ferrari, right?
Right. Yeah. He was taking all the half cents
cents.
off the accounts. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like 3/4 of a penny. And he's just getting all the customers, and next thing he's like, ooh.
I'm gonna have to rewatch that.
Yeah.
That's
That's funny.
That's my favorite Richard Pryor movie.
He showed up.
I like the toy too, but that was really good.
Somebody's been stealing the quarters off the bank. And he showed up in a Ferrari, right? Yeah. But used to be a show called Masterminds, and a guy actually did that. And he had the money wired offshore.
Nice.
Oh yeah, they're doing that shit now. But yeah. Yeah, that's how car dealerships, they have the what is that, dealer fee on there? Just
All those
$300.
fees?
Yeah. Well, the dealer fee is the fee that goes supposed to go to a trust or chest, just for all the cars that they couldn't fix or whatever, blah blah blah. That's what it's supposed to go to, but we know that goes to the dealer. So, but it's on every car. You can't take it off. Even if they take it off, it's
Backdoored on you.
yeah. It's new.
So I do want to show this. One other fun feat. Why you gotta hit me where I'm sore, man?
Sorry.
So you can grab. So over here on the left, I've got my template of shapes to use. I can grab this ore because I've got two different options coming off of stealing a penny at a time, right? I can either find some rounding errors to exploit, or I could just direct transfer from a bunch of different accounts.
Right.
So I can drop an ore there. The color changed. I wanted it to be green. I like the green.
Okay.
And then now we're just back to drawing lines, connecting the dots. This is just connect the dots. That's all this game is.
I want to use this.
Yeah.
I want to use this to replace Visio.
Honestly,
I can't draw at all, so this is going to help me draw.
Yeah.
I was a super big Visio adherent. I love this application, and I will never touch Visio again. I was a Visio fanboy before. Those diagrams are up on GitHub. I have a repository, the threat modeling playbook. It's got the stuff from the Microsoft threat modeling tool, the Draw.io examples that are here, the file I was just showing you. I've got some example diagrams, all of which were included in my presentation today. But that's all out on GitHub, and I'll have a link to that at the end of the presentation.
Nice.
I'm going to zip through the end here because we're bumping right up against.
Almost 9:21. Just kidding.
I was like, what? Hold on.
What you just witnessed was a timing attack.
Yeah, I drive my killer. It's bedtime.
You missed it earlier, but he said his laptop time zone was changed wrong. So
No, so my company works out of Tennessee. This is the work laptop, so it's on Tennessee time.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
All right. Got to get back to where we were in the presentation. Homegrown produce. Damn it. How do I get there?
F5.
How do you present from here?
Just click on the slide.
Slideshow.
This at the top? Let's start from the beginning.
No, this in the ribbon slideshow section from current slide.
Thank you. Jesus. I don't know how to PowerPoint. I don't know why I use PowerPoint to put this presentation together. All right. So what now? We've got our visual diagrams that we've put together. Off of the bottom of the attack tree, we've thought of some mitigations for each one of those. One other thing I forgot to mention. So as you're building the data flow diagram, the connect the dots that shows how the system is put together, you're gonna find things that make you go, wait, what? Like the API is just sitting out on the internet, but we've got all these controls on the front end. Okay, can we not have the API just sitting out on the internet, please? Put it behind a firewall, maybe? Dumb things like that just gets overlooked.
Boring.
It's boring, but please, let's fix it. All of those things you need to capture. And yeah, you can capture it in the narrative, but really it ultimately needs to become a work item. The action items, the questions you have that you need to follow up on, all of that stuff ends up going into your work list. Following your attack tree analysis, you're going to have a series of other work items. Some of those you're going to take back to the original group and say, hey, based on my analysis, these are the things I'm concerned about. And then the group is going to go and poke holes in all of your fears and say some of them you don't need to worry about, and some they're going to go, and when everybody goes, those things end up on your spreadsheet and then keep you up at night. Finally, when you get things fixed, don't delete it. Don't eliminate the line from your spreadsheet. Mark it as resolved so that you can filter it out. But you want to leave that paper trail there, because in a year from now, when you go through this process again and you think of this threat that you've never thought about before, and you get back to your spreadsheet, oh yeah, I did think about it last year. It's resolved. Oops. So socialize the model. The whole point is to get perspective. We've seen in this room tonight that I didn't think of everything, and there are things I thought about that were silly, and we want to capture all of those ideas, pull that together, and refine the model so it looks more like the system, and our threats look more like the actual threats that we need to mitigate and protect against. That little snippet that I have in this slide there, did we do a good job, is coming all the way back to Adam Showstack's original screenshot that I had in my first presentation. Did we do a good job in this process? Did we actually do the work that we set out to do? Iterate. This should not be a thing you build once and then put on a shelf and look what we did. Yay! It's a trophy collecting dust. No, it needs to be a living document that you review periodically and update as you get things mitigated. Finally, and this is a sort of a bonus thing, show the value that you've brought to the company. Like, we've identified these issues and we've gotten these 4 resolved, and we decided not to do anything about these 6 because it's not worth it. And these 3 we're working on, right? So those end up being some sizzle that you can provide on presentations about what it is that you say you do here. So a slide about process flow diagrams that I've already beat to death because, you know, I talked about this way earlier in the presentation. The value they do bring is they do uncover interactions, and they uncover components that your developers forgot to mention when you were enumerating components. They exhaustively walk through like all the steps necessary to do a thing. But that can be really, really time consuming. You can easily spend an hour and a half on gathering all of the steps involved for a single process. There is value there, but I strongly encourage you to use that sparingly and not have this the go-to hammer that you reach for, because everyone's going to hate you. And you want to make friends here, not enemies.
Is the perspective when you typically do this, is it reactive, so there's already an application that's been out there for a few years and you're doing this, or is it already injected in line?
In an ideal world, this is going to be part of the development life cycle, and when you get to the design phase and they're talking about building things, you can build a threat model there. I've never actually been in the room when that step of the process happened. I've always just been handled, here's our stable of applications. Can we build a
Yeah,
how do we secure them?
A new app, so I figured normally you're
so I, at work right now, have an application that's under active development, and they're working through building all of the development pipelines and all the features and everything. And I'm working to set up those threat modeling sessions so we can talk about the application they intend to build. I unfortunately don't have any experience, and I can't speak to like when you need to get involved in the process, right? Like, because there's a lot of time that happens between the conception of an application and we need to build a thing, let's spend the money on it, and the application's ready for somebody to start using.
Yeah.
So I do have some experience, Adam, if you allow me to contribute here.
Give me a chance to drink some water.
Drink some water. Yeah, so I have found that threat modeling, especially if you can get it in early part, like Adam said, it's like it's actually a great way to go through your legacy applications, because a lot of times with the applications, it's like it's not just one development group that's touched it, it's like 5, because it's people that's left, it's people that, you know, they hired contractors to work on it, and
this particular piece of code is dead.
Right. Possibly, quite possibly, yeah. But it is really great. Like I found benefit in that when you do get to do it with a newer thing, it's not just a security thing anymore. It actually does a really good job of getting the developers on the same page. And this is the perfect example. And Adam, I'm going to tell you the name of who said this. It was Rocky. He goes, "Oh wait, we're not building this in the cloud." It's like, no, this is on an on-prem server. So like right there, that shows that wasn't even a security thing. That was just developers going, "Oh, I thought we were doing this in an entirely different environment," right? So there's a business value there in getting people on the same page for what they're actually building, and that was very early on in the process. That was conception. It wasn't fully fetted out. Working with the developers, it gave them things to think about. And this is I gave a talk on this last year about how to social engineer developers into better security. Threat modeling is the way to do that, because once you start getting them into thinking about attack stuff, when they go to design stuff, they're thinking about that. If you've gone through a few sessions with them on it, they start thinking about some of the pitfalls that they can fall into if they develop it improperly. So that's where within a new design, new build, and this is where I push people, is like, if we've got everything that's out there, it's out there at this point, right? It's a lot like testing and the development life cycle. Yes, we can go back and test all the BS, but anything new going out, we want to test that before it goes live. And that's where I try to pitch that. It's the same thing with threat modeling. Anything that you guys are even thinking about developing, it's like we want to get involved and start having that conversation with the development team so that we can avoid any sort of security issues down the road. And that's where you like having that conversation and showing that you're the value. That's why I talked about the business value like right off the bat, right? Just getting developers on the same page, that shows value outside of the security issues that we want to address.
Yeah. The only point I was gonna make in that vein, and I don't disagree with anything you just said, is that if you get involved in the design process super early, there's the potential that you're going to be worried about some piece of design architecture that's ultimately going to be irrelevant, because they're going to figure out, because of business process changes or what have you, that they're just not going to build the application that way. And but that all comes back to having a relationship with your developers and getting them to pull you into the room at the right moment. And some of that you're just going to get wrong, and do it wrong. And doing it is better than doing it wrong is better than not doing it. And eventually, if you do it wrong enough, you'll figure out how to do it right.
Perfect never gets built.
That's right. Absolutely. Perfect is asymptotic. Resources. Hey, look, I finally mentioned Stride at the last slide of the presentation. There you go, Tim. Dread.
Thank you.
Also in there. I personally am also a Stride adherent. I think it's a much more, it's an easier thing to wrap your head around than the others. The links there. So the first one is the template that I was showing for Draw.io. The second one is my threat modeling playbook that I've got up there. Showstack.org because it's where I learned a lot of this. And then the tools there one last time. Repeated. I hope I didn't leave anything out.
You did.
I'm sure. Any other questions? Any other comments?
Man, good timing.
I like to have good timing.
Man, I'm just saying. You're good. That's great.
Really good presentation, Adam.
Thank you.
Thanks, man.
My only question is,
Good job.
what did you sacrifice to the demo gods? Because that was flawless.
How did you ask the question to Chat GPT?
How did you phrase it?
Hey, look, I found the flaw. There it is. The date didn't get updated on this very last slide.
Ooh.
And it says sample footer text at the bottom.
I have something.
Several slides.
Oh, did
I
you?
have something not related to the presentation. Hey, Patel, this is Corey. Do you still have your same phone number?
Yeah.
Okay. I texted you earlier. Want to follow up with you about something offline whenever you get a chance. That doesn't have to be tonight.
It came up as blocked number, so you have to try again.
Surprise! I've been trying to reach you about your car's extended warranty. So
All right. Well, thank y'all very much for tolerating my nonsense one more time.
Thank you.
Hey, you know what I've just realized because I saw this little nubbin sticking outside my laptop? Could have been using a mouse this whole damn time.
Oh wow.